All right. I think I'm seeing the bar. It's telling me that I've got sound, so hopefully you guys can hear me. Um, just wanted to get in some time to do a short video to kind of give an overview of the immune system. What I notice a lot of times is that students go into this chapter, they go into this material, and they think they really understand it, and sometimes they do. They really have a really good grasp on it. Um, but they get into it and then they get on the test and they take the test and they're like, man, that sucked, man, that was terrible. And we start to discuss what it is about the immune system that they didn't get. And in reality, there was probably a lot of stuff that they didn't understand. They thought they understood it, but they didn't. It's kind of like the first time I saw the Matrix trilogy. I swore up and down that by the time I got halfway through the second movie, that I understood what was going on. I knew it. I was like, I got this, dude. I know exactly how this thing is going to end. I know how everything is going to go down. And after I finished the last movie, when the credits started rolling, I looked to my friend and I said, dude, I don't know what just happened. And I had to go back through and during Christmas break, we went back and we watched the whole trilogy all the way from start to finish. And after watching it back again, I started realizing, okay, there's some basic fundamentals that I didn't catch. Like I needed to pay close attention to what was real, what was not real, and what was perceived as having come alive during the movie. And that's another story for another day. This isn't a cinematic joint. This is talking about anatomy and physiology. The point of the matter is, with the immune system, you need to determine when you're talking about something that's happening outside of the cell, when you're talking about something that's happening inside of the cell, and when you're talking about something that's either cell to cell, or whether you're talking about something that's chemical. And believe you me, if you don't know when those four things are happening, then you're fooling yourself. You really think you understand it, and you don't. And take it from somebody who thought they understood what was going on in the immune system. But over time, I learned that I didn't understand it as well as I thought I did. So those are four things you've got to get down. You got to figure out, okay, is what I'm reading, is that happening inside of a cell, or is that happening outside of a cell? And then you need to figure out, for everything that you're studying, is that something that is a cellular interaction, or is that a chemical interaction? For example, when a cell becomes infected with a virus. So let's say a virus has infiltrated a cell and it has now interrupted that cellular activity inside of the cell, and it's got ribosomes helping it to create viral proteins. And this is turning into a very bad scenario, worst case scenario situation inside of that cell. All of that is happening inside of the cell, and there's a bunch of organelles that are functioning alongside with some structures that we refer to as protein, cytokines, and pyrokines, and all these other different chemicals that we'll talk about in some future videos. Those are things happening on a chemical level. There's not a cell interacting with a cell in those situations. Those are chemicals binding to receptor sites and chemicals eliciting different responses. So you got to figure out which one of those four things you're in before you dive in. And once you figure out which of those four things you're in, then it'll help you to kind of set up like a guidepost. It's kind of like playing football with no lines. And I've done that before. You're playing football and dude runs in there and says, man, you're out of bounds. And it's like, well, where's the line for out of bounds? I don't know. Well, wait a minute. This is going to make it really difficult for us to dictate who's going to be a winner. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to take you to some notes that I kind of want to discuss. And let's see, I want to share what I have from my notes. I'm going to take the easy way out, and I'm just going to use full screen because sometimes, here, I'm going to present to everyone. I'm going to present this to everybody so everybody can see what I've got up on my screen. And I'm going to take you to this slide. Now, I don't want to risk messing anything up because you never know when you're going to click something. And Google Plus is great, but sometimes there's some snafus with Google Plus. So I'm just going to keep it right here. What I want to show you right now is I want you to look at this. The immune system protects us from infectious agents and harmful substances. Notice that the immune system really doesn't have anything else that it does. It's a protection agency. So you need to get this in your mind from square one. Anytime I had to learn an organ system or something specific about the human body, and it was telling me, oh yeah, well, we're going to learn the digestive system today and blah, 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 blah. Well, I need to know exactly what does this thing do? The immune system, what does it do? It protects me. Okay, that's it. That's all you need to know. It's in the protection business. So think like all the movies and anime and American cartoons and television shows that you've seen. Think about the level of protection that you have. If you watch the TV series Arrow, then think about the level of protection. Think about how Arrow has to keep his place protected. Think of Batman. Think of Batman comics and think of Batman movies. Think of the level of protection that Bruce Wayne has. When you look at other movies and TV shows, if you watch Game of Thrones, if you've watched Lord of the Rings, especially with Lord of the Rings and that one in Lord of the Rings, the second one, when they had to defend that city from the orcs, when they had to defend that thing, it was all about having these different types of defenses to be able to keep the enemy out. And there's one scene in that movie where you can tell that they're going to be able to hold out against these orcs for a long time. But the orcs managed to blow a hole in one weak spot in the wall, which winds up bringing down the entire section of the wall. And the orcs get in and it gets ugly. So defense is an all-encompassing thing. If you don't have a defense, then that means that the enemy is going to get in. Well, what's the enemy? Well, the enemy are what we call pathogens. A pathogen is any outside agent to the body that can cause harm. That is a pathogen. Okay. That is a pathogen. A pathogenic organism is anything that can get inside of the body to cause you harm. So the list that these notes have are 5 major categories. Notice they're major categories because there's a whole entire host of other nasty things that are out there. But for the sake of time and for the sake of what we're talking about, we're just going to focus on these 5. There are bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoans, and what we call multicellular parasites, which we just commonly refer to as parasites. And some of these organisms, they can do some pretty nasty things depending on where they are. Now, understand this. Dealing with pathogens is like dealing with a pest in your home. You can't, if you have a problem with ants, you don't put out rat poison. You don't put out rat poison to kill ants. You get ant poison to kill ants. If you're having a bad problem in your garden with grasshoppers and locusts, you're not going to use the same method to get rid of grasshoppers and locusts as you would to get rid of ants or mice. You wouldn't do that. All right. So you have to know your pathogen. You have to know your pest. And you have to make defenses that are specific against each pest. Now, notice, this is like the 3rd slide in this thing. And if you miss this, it's going to make something that we talk about 60 or 70 slides from now. It's going to make it totally uncomprehendable. You're not going to be able to grasp it, because you got to understand, a bacterium and a virus are not the same size. If I'm going to fight against bacteria, one of the primary things that I need to focus on with bacteria is just simply keeping them out. There's a lot of bacteria that you encounter every single day that the inside of your body never seems to have to deal with. And if it does deal with it, it's by mistake, because that bacteria is not going to get inside of you unless you personally transport it in. That bacteria can sit on your hand and it's not going to get inside of you. However, that virus, he can be airborne. Viruses are much smaller. So when they get in the body, they're not trying to stay in the body fluids for long. Viruses are trying to get inside of a cell. Viruses are trying to infiltrate your intercellular network. That's what they want to do. They want to get inside. A fungus can cause drama on the outside of your body. And so can parasites. I mean, fungi, protozoans, parasites, these are much larger pathogens than a virus. And so they deal with things in an entirely separate way. That's like, if you look at movies, like Mission Impossible movies, if you notice that Mission Impossible movies, they show you with the Mission Impossible mission force, they work with very small teams. They're trying to work with a team of like 4 and no more and that kind of thing. They're never working with large groups, because how are you going to march an army of people into this installation? The army can't fit. You got 100-man army trying to get into one building. No, they'll see you coming from a mile away. So what do you send in? You send a 4-man team, or better yet, you use a 4-man team to get 1 man in. And the same thing happens with your body. So let's get into this a little more. So the key cell that is going to be running things with the immune system, and that are known as leukocytes, aka white blood cells. Remember that leukocyte, if you break the word down, which you should always try to break words down, you should wordsmith words in anatomy and physiology, because terminology is key. Leuko means white, cyte means cell, so white blood cells, leukocytes. We make these white blood cells in our bone marrow. They don't all differentiate in the bone marrow. However, that's why we call these T cells or T lymphocytes, because these T lymphocytes, they go on to differentiate at the thymus gland, while the B lymphocytes, they all go on to differentiate at the bone marrow. We've got 3 different types of granulocytes. If you don't know what a granulocyte is, basically all it is a white blood cells with granules in them. The granules are these little sacs, shaped organelle type structures inside of the cell that have specialized secretions within them. And they use these for a series of different things. We have 3 different granulocytes that we have to know. There are neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. Neutrophils, these are the guys that their primary job is to attack bacteria. Eosinophils, their primary job is to attack parasites. And basophils, which these guys like to release special chemicals, kind of like histamine, that allows us to have an inflammatory response. So already we can see that it's all about defense and attack here with these cells. So remember what I talked about with the immune system. This is private security. All right. So with private security, we have a way to defend and we have a way to attack. Leukocytes also include monocytes, which upgrade into macrophages. Macro means large, phage means eater. So large eater, that's what a macrophage is. And notice that it says they become macrophages when they take up residence in the tissues. Some of these macrophages, they become fixed, and some of them become free macrophages. Free macrophages, they float around. They'll move from place to place. They'll use your bloodstream to transport from one place to another. They don't generally stay in your bloodstream very long at all. They just transport in the bloodstream just long enough to get from point A to point B. But the not the free, but the fixed macrophages, they stay in one spot. That's why they're called fixed. And macrophages, they are known, their claim to fame is engulfing things. So they're like the Cookie Monster white blood cells of the body. They eat everything. And when I mean Cookie Monster, I'm talking about old school Cookie Monster, not the new Cookie Monster. I saw an episode of Sesame Street a few years ago, and Cookie Monster was eating vegetables and promoting carrots, and I was like, whoa, what's going on? What happened to the Cookie Monster that ate the cookies, the plate that the cookies were on, and the table that the plate and the cookies were on? I mean, Cookie Monster would just destroy everything for a cookie. So that's what I'm talking about. That's what a real macrophage is like. It's like old school Cookie Monster. Macrophages, they encounter a pathogen. They don't care what the pathogen is. If they can engulf it, they will. They'll destroy it and they'll dispose of it. And then last but not least, out of the leukocytes are lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are probably one of the most important cells in your entire body. I read that if your lymphocytes did not work, that you would die in 24 hours, literally, because lymphocytes are the core cells of your immune response and just of your immune system. Basically, lymphocytes are responsible for immunity. But which, let me say this about immunity. All right, lymphocytes are, they're responsible for immunity. Something you have to keep in mind. Immunity does not mean that you don't get sick. And immunity does not mean that pathogens cannot invade your space. Immunity just simply means that you have a pre-existing defense against a specific pathogen. That's it. That's all it means. So it just means I have a pre-existing defense against a current pathogen. That's it. And although that may sound kind of dumbed down and it may seem like it's not that important, it's uber important. So don't take this the wrong way. I'm going two different directions at the same time with this. And in our future video on specific immunity, I'll get into that a bit more. But you can see the different types of lymphocytes here. You got B lymphocytes, you got T lymphocytes, you got natural killer cells. B lymphocytes, commonly referred to as B cells. B cells, they are cells that when they are stimulated and when they're stimulated, they'll ultimately go on to create antibodies, which gives T lymphocytes are like, helper T cells or cytotoxic T cells, which they have entirely different roles, entirely different jobs. They do not look the same, but they have extremely important jobs. Like helper T cells, they don't attack anything, but they're responsible for identifying a pathogen and letting other cells know this is our confirmed target. Well, as anyone who's watched any movies, action movies or adventure movies or thrillers, if you don't confirm your target, you can't hit anything. That's why the HIV virus, that's why the AIDS virus attacks helper T cells, so that your immune system can never truly identify the target. Natural killer cells, NK cells, those cells are so funny. And the reason why I say they're funny is they're like the Cujo cells in your body. They're like Rottweiler cells. They can rip some stuff up. They are quick to attack marked infected cells. If you have an infected cell, they will destroy it. If there's a cancer cell there, they will jump on it and destroy it. Natural killer cells spend their entire life doing nothing but searching the body for irregular cells and infected cells. At one point in time, the reason why I say it's funny, at one point in time in the 70s, researchers discovered a natural killer cell. They didn't know what it was. They just saw that it was highly aggressive and it was rapidly destroying other cells. And they thought that the natural killer cell was a zombie cell. I'm not sure if these researchers were all into George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, but at that point in time, people were coming out with a lot of zombie novels and a lot of apocalyptic novels and movies about the world coming to an end and virus turning people into other beings. So yeah, believe it or not, all this stuff with Resident Evil and um, all the 28 days later and 28 weeks later, and and all this stuff that's been out for the last several years. This stuff's not new. This stuff's actually old. So those researchers, they were so afraid of what they found, they held it from the public, they kept it a secret, and they nicknamed the cells natural killer cells until they discovered that natural killer cells were actually white blood cells, and that they were good, and that the only things that they were really destroying were abnormal cells like cancer cells, and the name stuck. Here's an image of the different types of leukocytes. You can see the neutrophils over here on the left, and you can see large masses within them. Here's the eosinophils and large masses with them as well. And then there's the basophils. And so inside these three, you see all these weird purple dots in there. Some of them have way more purple dots than others. These purple dots are the granules. They're storing different secretions within them. So like neutrophils, the secretions that they would have inside of them will be specific for breaching the walls of a bacterium so that they could destroy that bacterium. Whereas a basophil, in their granules, they're going to have histamine. So when they release their histamine, they can start an inflammatory effect. As far as structures are concerned for the immune system, really, okay. If you've ever studied the lymphatic system is just made up of organs that store immune cells. So like your lymph nodes, your spleen, your tonsils, your lymph nodes, you'll notice that most of those structures on their own don't do a whole lot, but it's more about the lymphatic cells or the immune cells that hang out inside those structures that do the work. Like the spleen itself, the spleen is not up. You don't wake up in the morning and the spleen is like, hey, how you doing? And the spleen is in there, ironing your shirt, getting your tie ready, fixing you some toast and some breakfast in the morning. Your spleen does not do that. All right. That's why most people don't even know what your spleen does. They'll just say, oh, I know what your spleen does. Your spleen helps your immune system, doesn't it? Well, that's absolutely correct. How does it help your immune system? I have no clue. And the reason why they have no clue is because the spleen sitting on a table does nothing. It's the cells inside of the spleen that's really doing the bulk of the work, because the cells inside of your spleen are doing everything from removing dead and broken red blood cells to finding bloodborne pathogens and removing them as well. And so it's really the cells inside of that thing that's doing the brunt work. The same thing with a lymph node. Lymph is passing through a lymph node, and you're kind of like, okay, how is it really filtering? Well, you have a ton of lymphocytes that hang out in your lymph nodes, and that's how they're able to eradicate 99% of all the pathogens and debris that flows through a lymph node, because you've got all those cells in there that's doing the work. So when we look at the location of immune cells, here are some of the primary locations of immune cells. Naturally, you see all 5 of these guys traveling through the bloodstream, and they do that because that's kind of the interstate or highway of your body, and they use that so that they can get from point A to point B. And that's for everybody. Neutrophils, you'll notice, you'll find that neutrophils will travel when they catch wind of a bacteria infection. So if there's bacteria that have breached the premises and they've gotten inside your body, you'll see neutrophils migrate to that area. You can see several of these white blood cells located here in lymphatic tissue. So if this was in a lymph node, then we'd see some T cells, B cells, macrophages, some natural killer cells here kind of chilling, doing their job. We also see that sometimes they'll be in very select organs. Like here we have an alveolar macrophage, and this alveolar macrophage is kind of hanging out inside of an alveolus, which is an air sac in your lungs. Contrary to popular belief, your lungs are not what you think they are. Your lungs probably have more in common with a common bathroom sponge rather than the other organs in the body. If you took a person's human lung and put it in a bathtub, it'd probably float because the way that it's structured and everything. And we'll talk about that in a separate hangout. But the thing that I want to impress upon you here is that you got this macrophage kind of just chilling. And this guy is here trying to get rid of pathogens and debris, because whether we want to believe it or not, there are things floating around in the air. Don't believe me? Wait till you wake up first thing in the morning and that bright, happy sunlight is shining through your window, and just sit in your bed at just the right angle, and you'll see all kinds of dust and debris floating through the air in your room. And you're sitting there thinking, wow, why, how, I can't believe I'm seeing this. It makes me want to walk around with a mask everywhere I go. There's crap in the air all the time, and we inhale it all of the time. And sometimes that stuff makes it through our filtering system, which is our upper respiratory tract and upper respiratory tract. And that debris sometimes is able to make it all the way down to the alveoli, which is the end of the line for oxygen and air coming into your lungs. So that macrophage has to be there and prepared to be able to deal with that debris and pathogens. A dendritic cell can be seen here hanging out in the epithelial tissue of the skin and mucosal membranes. Sometimes we have dendritic cells spread throughout the epidermis of our skin. They respond to incoming invaders. We'll talk about that a little later on in a different video. And then we have mast cells, which of course they're throughout, connective tissue, which is why if you have a small tear in a tendon or a ligament, those mast cells activate, they release histamine, and everything in that area just becomes inflamed and really painful. So one thing you have to talk about that's kind of off the beaten path, but you want to get this out of the way, is a cytokine. A cytokine is considered a soluble protein. It's a chemical. Okay. So right at this moment, let's go back to those 4 things I told you at the very beginning. Am I talking about something on a chemical level, which is way smaller than a cell, or am I talking about something on a cellular level? Well, right now I'm talking about something on a chemical level. It is a chemical. A cytokine is not alive, regardless of the fact that I may refer to it like it's a living thing. It is an inanimate chemical. All right. It is a chemical. It's not alive. And a cytokine, it's a lot like a hormone. So if you remember how hormones work, then it works a lot like a hormone. It's released from some cell somewhere and it floats through the body fluids, and then it binds to a receptor site on a target cell. And so what winds up happening is it can do a lot of weird things. A cytokine can be released from a cell and then act on that cell, or it can act on the cells around it, or it can go to an entirely different organ or an entirely different area of the body and act on cells there. So a cytokine is highly diverse. The cell can release the cytokine, and the cytokine make that same cell that released it do something. Or it can release a cytokine and it just stimulates its next door neighbor cell, or it can be released and it can leave that tissue and then go to an entirely different tissue in an entirely different region in the body. Cytokines have a short half-life, so they don't last very long, and you use cytokines a whole lot. So here are some of the things that cytokines do. These are very, very generalized ways of talking about cytokines. And what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to take our time in some other videos and talk about these cytokines, because I can sit here and talk about cytokines for another 25 minutes. But I want to keep this to an overview of immunity. Now, we're coming up on the end of this talk, and I got like 2 or 3 more slides left. And this is one of the things that I really want to get to you is when you start talking about immunity and getting into the specifics of immunity, this is when we find out that really with immunity, there are two different categories of the immune system. There's innate immunity and there's adaptive immunity. Back when I was taking this class, innate immunity was what we called non-specific, and adaptive immunity was what we called specific. Because in innate immunity, it does not target. It only defends. It doesn't defend against, it's not it doesn't have a prejudice against what it's going to defend against. A perfect example of innate immunity is a wall. A wall could care less whether you black, white, red, yellow. It doesn't care if you're Puerto Rican or Haitian. It doesn't care what you are. A wall is a wall, and a wall is designed to keep things out. Whether you're keeping out the elements of bad weather, or whether you're keeping out bad people, it don't care. It's a wall. A wall is not going to look at someone and say, "Hi, I love short people, but I hate tall people, so I ain't going to let that tall dude in. But hey, you short and cute, I let you in." No, that's not what a wall does. A wall keeps out whatever a wall keeps out, which is whatever. And innate immunity is like that. Innate immunity is what you were born with. It's what you're born with. It's what you have. It's just there. And innate immunity is oftentimes genetically determined. I am human. Okay, so because I'm human, and I have these specific walls that I have up, it's going to keep out things, and those things can be a wide range of things. Like, for example, your skin is part of your innate immunity. Your skin does not sit there and say, well, I'm not going to let in bacteria, but I'm going to let in a few of these viruses though. No, it keeps everything out. It keeps all five of those major categories of pathogens that we're talking about. It keeps all five of those out as much as it can. It doesn't look at a fungus and say, well, I'm gonna let you in, but I'm gonna keep the bacterium out. No, it tries to keep everybody out. It's not specific. Adaptive immunity is just what it sounds like. It adapts to the pathogen itself. So that's why when you get the flu shot, you have to get one every year, because these strains of flu viruses, influenza viruses, they mutate, they change. That's what a virus does. It mutates. So the virus from last year is going to mutate, and it's going to become something entirely different for next year. So you have to get a flu shot that's based off of what we're predicting this virus to become. Your body creates its own adaptive immunity all the time without the flu shot. So what it does is it says, well, this is what this thing is now. We're going to adapt and we're going to make a defense against it. And that way, if we ever encounter that particular pathogen again, we got you. The only bad thing about adaptive immunity is if you have adaptive immunity against virus number 1, it doesn't work on virus number 2. It's specific immunity. So it only works on, it's a defense that only works on the pathogen that you encountered the first time. So that's where we're going to end this talk for today. I'm glad that you guys were able to stop by and work with me. Hopefully we'll get into some more things today. There's some more stuff I want to talk about in some future talks. And I definitely want to get into dealing with innate immunity and adaptive immunity. As a matter of fact, I think that I'm going to go ahead and start another broadcast with innate immunity in just a short amount of time. So stick around. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.